Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Horse's Mouth Live, the Extraordinary Advisor Show. My name is Ellen Rogin, and as always, I bring in amazing, brilliant guests to share information with you that will help you in every area of your life, especially your business. And we have a return guest today, Jennifer Vandervey, who I will introduce her official background in a little bit, but Jennifer is an expert in mergers and acquisitions. And you might say, well, why would that be applicable to financial advisors? Well, it's super applicable in so many ways. First of all, some of you out there may be thinking about selling your practice. You may be thinking about acquiring your practice. And if neither of those apply to where you're at right now, it will happen to your clients. They'll be part of a company that will be bought or sold, and there's lots that goes into that. Our conversation today is beyond the numbers. So it's easy when you think about selling your practice or buying one that's like, oh, I need help figuring out the amount that I'm going to get or ask for or negotiate. And yes, of course you do. And honestly, there's a lot of people out there helping with that. But after going through selling my practice a few years ago, there was lots more involved than just negotiating the deal about communication and how I felt personally, how the person who bought my practice felt. And that's where Jennifer's brilliance comes in. So let me give you a little bit about her official background. Jennifer Vandervey is the founder and Chief Humanity Officer. Like, don't you just love that? Chief Humanity Officer of Day One Ready. It's a consultancy firm that advises forward-thinking business leaders and owners and C-suite executives on how to prepare and manage people for the challenge of a business transition, of particularly mergers and acquisitions. And Jennifer speaks from deep experience. She is what she calls herself a Fortune 500 C-suite survivor, having been through 3 separate multi-billion-dollar acquisitions. She authored an amazing, fun book called Now What, which is a survivor's guide for thriving through mergers and acquisitions. She was on our show a few years back as a return guest. She also is an expert sharing her information in Harvard Business Review and Fast Company and Forbes and Thrive and all these other places because people go to her because she speaks from deep experience and knows what she's talking about. So welcome, Jennifer. So great to have you back to our show.
Thank you. Hearing you say we have brilliant guests on, and then my bio, you set a high bar for our guests. So I'm going to make sure to deliver on that.
I have no worries at all. And I actually don't say brilliant all the time. I said that because you're on. So nothing against our other guests. They're true brilliant. But I was very deliberate when I said that about you, Jennifer. So as I mentioned, we had you back on in 2017. It was before we were live streaming. It was just the podcast back then. And it was before you launched your book. You were in the process of writing it. So maybe fill us in a little bit about what you've been up to and what kind of impact your book has had.
So the book, and it's so fascinating to me, the journey that when we were talking, I was doing the research and actually financial advisors were part of the people who I interviewed to contribute to the book. And the book came out in the fall of 2019. As you would imagine, 2020, the book tour, all of that kind of got, I'll say, put on hold. We're not going to say canceled. But the upside of what I saw happen as a result of the book coming out was how many people took the time to read the book, to get smart on it. Mergers and acquisitions slowed for a period of time in 2020, but unfortunately, as you would imagine, Ellen, have picked up again significantly. Businesses are struggling to survive. So much has changed. And so the benefit of the book is I've had an opportunity to coach and help not only individuals going through mergers and acquisitions, but equally businesses and executives to navigate that people piece of mergers and acquisitions. And I would say, and I'd welcome your thoughts. I feel that one of the outcomes of 2020 and the pandemic and this increased focus on humanity is a greater attention to people, the people piece of business. You've seen so many articles on mental health and how people are coping. And so, one of the benefits is there's more attention to what I focus on, the people piece of mergers and acquisitions.
Yeah, and I hope that continues, right? Because as things open up and go back to people being face to face, acquisitions increasing, I just hope that it doesn't flip back to the other way. I know one of the stats you shared with me that I think is just shocking is that 70 to 90% of mergers and acquisitions fail. So talk to us a little bit more when you say, like, what does it mean by failing, and what causes that? Is it that the deal was negotiated poorly? I'm thinking you're not going to say that, knowing what your expertise is. So fill us in a little bit more on why that is and what we can learn from it.
Well, and you touched on it, interestingly, you touched on it at the beginning when you talked about financial advisors who may be thinking of selling their business. One of the challenges I see is that in that due diligence period, the transaction is so much the focus. It's, what are the numbers and the forecasting and the valuation and what multiples can we get, which is understandable. But where I play is in the people piece. And typically that's not part of that upfront thinking. There's not a consideration for how this is going to play out, and will cultures align, and will certain key talent remain, and how will our company integrate with the other company. Those are considered, we'll get to that later. And by postponing that discussion, by not having that insight earlier, and it's not just me, Harvard Business Review and McKinsey have done survey after survey for the past 10 years. And what's fascinating to me is that trend line remains. 70 to 90% of M&A deals don't achieve their valuation in the first year. So what they propose is the reason for the merger or acquisition doesn't come to fruition in year one. And so my goal, both in writing the book and consulting advisors and owners, is to help mitigate that unexpected aspect, the people piece of the deal making.
I think that's so. So I want to talk about it from an advisor standpoint, and then also go into what people are feeling as they're going through this, what their clients may be feeling. But I know that the broker dealers have all sorts of programs to help you. There's calculators to figure it out. They give you your agreements. I know when I went through my transition, there was lots of support, but none of that was talked about. They're like, oh, that'll be fine. You guys, it'll all be easy for you. And whether it was my comfort level, the buyer's comfort level, my staff's comfort level, her staff's comfort level, there was none. We thought we were talking about that, but in terms of actually getting any support from that, they might disagree, but I don't think it was really there. It was very high level, and it was probably more around the services and what you think is important. So, Jennifer,
and I get that.
Well, and if you think about their objective, these people helping you,
right?
Their objective is to keep the assets. They want to help you, but why do they want to help you? They don't want people leaving the broker dealer. They want the assets to stay where they are, or whatever their incentive is. But so what are some of the things?
And that's why, Ellen, I would say I appreciate you having this conversation with me, because that is typically the norm. That is the standard. I'm the canary in the coal mine saying you need to have this conversation sooner. But typically everything you just described is what is the standard. So, my mission, if you will, is to say that conversation needs to happen earlier. And so even the opportunity to have this conversation with you starts to make people more aware of the necessity to think about the people piece beforehand.
Yeah. And the fact when you defined not being successful is it didn't achieve the business objective. So if it's AUM staying on the books or clients staying on the books, that's in everybody's best interest that happens. You want to take care of your clients. It also will be part of your selling your business, probably how it's calculated.
Mhm.
So it's not that we wouldn't care about the humanity part. I mean, hopefully all of you out there would care about that, but it's also deeply tied into your financial transaction, whether you're a buyer or a seller. So talk a little bit about what can happen for people if they're going through a transition. So this might be a time to make it about if a client's company is going through a merger and acquisition, if you're trying to support them as an advisor, what are some things that might be coming up for them? And it might be very similar if you're someone selling your practice or buying one. So Jennifer, explain a little bit more what goes on for people.
So the first thought, particularly if maybe it's your firm, or you are just a financial advisor at a firm and you're aware that a merger or an acquisition deal is underway, people, you're going to feel hesitation, concern. There's going to be a lot of worry about, I hope this plays out well. The first thoughts tend to be, will I still have my job? Do I still keep my book of business? How are things going to play out? And so one of the things that I really feel strongly that financial advisors can do if they're advising clients is the stability that they can bring, the certainty that they can bring for people who may be going through a merger or an acquisition and concerned about how things are going to play out. And if they themselves, as a financial advisor at a firm, are going through it, I always say you have to be prepared for the unexpected, knowing that there's going to be transition, that not everyone reacts to change equally the same. The last time we had this conversation, Ellen, I talked about the stages of grief, the fact that people can go through a grieving stage, particularly if they've built up their firm, if they've built up the practice, or if they've contributed to it. And suddenly now through a deal, things are changing. You can go legitimately through stages of grief. And it takes a while to get from denying that this has happened or that something is going to happen, and slowly get to acceptance and recognizing that things have changed. So for financial advisors in particular who may be entertaining a merger or an acquisition themselves, I always say just be prepared for the unexpected, for that period where you might grieve that change and loss of certainty that you had before. And there's nothing wrong with that. To me, it's more just letting them know it's to be expected and not to think that you're going crazy. And frankly, that was one of the fascinating feedbacks that I got from the book in particular, was people saying, just reading about the stages of grief helped me realize I wasn't going crazy.
Well, I didn't expect that when I sold my practice, because I was really excited to do more speaking and training and working on my book, maybe writing new books and doing new programs. I was ready, but I didn't expect that, feeling bad that this was a business I built up for over more than 25 years. And I really did love my clients and missed being that trusted advisor. So that clearly was a surprise for me. And I can think back about clients that went through mergers and acquisitions, and that feeling of uncertainty, like, I don't know if my job's still going to be here. I don't know if the commission structure is going to be the same. And a lot of what I did do, which is what you're suggesting advisors do, is be that sounding board and talking through different scenarios, how this might play out for them. And I do think that gives them some level of at least financial comfort, which I would think would be a big part of their concern, not the only concern.
Absolutely. A financial advisor can provide certainty. When you're facing uncertainty on so many different fronts, you're craving certainty in some area of your life. So having a great financial advisor who you can rely on to do exactly as you suggested, right? Scenario plans, so that I can frankly assess, if my company is going through a merger and acquisition and I'm trying to figure out, is my role still what I want it to be? Is this still the right fit for me? I'm able to make those evaluations and decisions if I've had that conversation with my financial advisor to feel as though, okay, I have the stability, I have the certainty to be smart about what's my next career move. Because as you said, and we shared before, there's so many things that run through your mind the moment you hear your company's going through a merger and acquisition. And it tends to usually be, goes to the negative. Do I still have a job? What's this going to look like? How am I going to cover my mortgage? So financial advisors play an incredibly important role to a client that's going through this, to provide that certainty and stability.
I know in your book you talk about different personas that people can take on during a merger and acquisition, which might not be how they showed up before that. Talk a little bit more about how that happens and what some of these personas are, because I think it's really helpful to realize, again, like that person you were mentioning, like they weren't crazy or they thought they knew somebody and all of a sudden they turned into a kind of a different person. What you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, in the point of that in the book, and just in how I reflected even in my research, was to highlight that when people are afraid, you can see a different side of them, and it's not always the best side of them. Think about the TV show Survivor, right? When people are just trying to hold on to what they have, you saw in that TV show, you treat someone like an ally one day, and then you might throw them under the bus the next. And so a big part of the personalities that I wrote about was to simply prepare people for that reality, and particularly to highlight people you thought you knew. Maybe you had lunch with someone, 5 years you've known them, and suddenly you start to see a different side of them. And I bring those personalities to life. So I talk about the specialist, the ostrich, the missing in action, the different things that you can see people will go through, and the personalities that might emerge when fear is the operative emotion. And I intentionally highlight the personalities to say, don't judge, because you may too be exhibiting certain behaviors that you wouldn't normally. When you're stressed and anxious, I think we all would admit that we don't necessarily always show up as our best self. And so I tried to have fun by creating caricatures around the personalities, more for people to go, oh yeah, I recognize I've probably been a know-it-all, or I may even be a former rock star, right? I was doing really well in the company and now I don't know, how to contribute, how to be successful. So it really, the beauty of that is I've had a lot of people who have indicated the personalities help them actually make sure they didn't become a caricature, and also how to work with people when they were not necessarily showing the best version of themselves.
This is so helpful to realize there's so much more that comes into play here. And it reminds me, and many of you out there, I'm sure, have had this experience with your clients, when there's a death in the family, maybe not like I'm not talking about a spouse or a child or something, but maybe there's an inheritance that comes in, and all of a sudden siblings start fighting about the money, or they turn different in the situation. I remember when my mom passed away, I knew where all her assets were. I was the one kind of settling the estate. I have two very smart brothers, and I felt all this responsibility. I was grieving my mom's death, and I got weird about some things, and they got weird about some things that was just different. It all ended up, we never had fights about things, but it wasn't. I remember my brother Jim, who is probably the smartest person that I know, saying to me, I just want to make sure we stay on this attorney. Like, I don't want this to take like a month to get settled. Now, all of you out there know it takes more than a month to settle an estate if there's any assets. But here I was like, oh, I know. I didn't say to my brother, like, that's not a realistic expectation. Let's talk about this. We'll keep things moving. But I went into wanting to please everyone and being freaked out about things. And so that may be a way to sense, even if you haven't been through this, or you're about to go through this, or you're thinking about it, or you're just being there for your clients going through that. It had me think about that when you were talking about grieving, how people are just different. They're not themselves.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I've talked a lot about this recently, the lessons that we can learn from the pandemic. And I use that as a reference point. Think about through the time of the crisis, particularly at the beginning, you likely saw people say and do things you never expected. Maybe they acted differently or they said something and you thought, wow, I did not expect him or her to have that point of view or that opinion. Because when you're stressed and your future is uncertain, again, it's just a different side of you comes out. And I think the important thing is not to judge one another, but to recognize the possibility for that and to be smart about, okay, let me check myself. I exactly as you just described. It's kind of okay, how do I need to step back from this to assess it and determine how I want to show up, how I want to be in this moment. And in a merger and acquisition, so much is happening. It can feel like it's all out of your control. So I try and help people focus on the things that they can control, their behavior and their attitude being key.
Are there questions that you would recommend an advisor ask if a client's going through this? Because I could see them being like, okay, are they changing the 401k plan? Are you getting severance if you're letting, like all the ticking and tying in the financial parts, but to really appreciate where a client's at and what they really might be going through. Are there any suggested things that the advisor could bring up that are beyond just the money questions?
Absolutely. I think a financial advisor who has a trusted advisor role, first and foremost, I would ask the client, how are you doing? How are you feeling? What do you feel about this merger and acquisition? Do you think it's good for the company? What role do you see potentially for you? And I don't think that will be seen as intrusive, particularly if you've got a great relationship with your client, helping them feel as though there's someone in their corner who's thinking about not just, hey, let's go through your financials, let's make sure you're feeling comfortable about where you are, and particularly if you've set up a certain plan and path for how you build on your investments. But I think taking the time to ask them how they're feeling and to help them even step back, because oftentimes there's a lot of negative baggage that comes with M&A. So the moment you hear, hey, your company is going through it, you tend to go straight towards all the worst case scenarios. And so having a financial advisor who's a partner that says, okay, let's think about what, you've talked forever about wanting to do XYZ. Do you still see that as possible with this company? Your skill set is in this. How are you feeling about that? And perhaps not being prescriptive about the answer, but asking questions that helps the client understand the financial advisor not only, gets where they are in the moment and understands perhaps all the emotions that they're going through, but is also helping them step back to see the bigger picture. And that can be invaluable.
I love that. In the Extraordinary Advisor masterclass that we're right in the middle of right now, a lot of what we're talking about is communication skills and empathy and really understanding where a client's at and not always having to advise, but to be there for somebody. And I don't know, I'm sure you do, but I don't know that people immediately think of when there's a merger or acquisition that could be a really difficult period for people. I think intellectually they're like, oh yeah, they might feel a little stressed, but I don't know that they really understand that the same as if there was a death in the family or some other big transition. So I think it's just beautiful advice to ask those kind of questions, like how are you doing through this? Just to even acknowledge that it may be challenging for them. I think that's really,
And
really helpful.
that's honestly, Ellen, why I wrote about the stages of grief, and I equated it to that because it might seem superficial, but it's a company. But if you've invested your energy and your heart and soul into this company, whether it's a company you own, or in my case, I was an executive, I had a million miles on two airlines, right? So I had almost exhausted myself, but I loved my job and I saw it start to unravel and fall apart in three separate multi-billion dollar acquisitions. So that's why I wanted to write about the emotional part, to bring awareness to that, because people are afraid to talk about it. They tend to be embarrassed. Why do I feel this way? Why would I feel depressed? Why am I angry? And I think when people say it's not personal, it's just business, if you've been a rock star in your company, it is personal. You've invested a lot of yourself. So the more, as a financial advisor, you can be empathetic and that partner that your client can turn to say, I'm not sure how this is going to go. I'm trying to figure out where the opportunities are and my role in it. The more that they have an outlet to have that conversation, and I think a financial advisor could really play a very important partnership role.
I agreed. So before we let you go, I'm so your tagline is rediscovering the humanity in business. There's a manifesto that you have around that. Talk to us more about why you think that's so important and how you came to really knowing, I love your title again, Chief Humanity Officer. So talk to us a little bit more about why all this is important to you and what you see as needed.
Well, it's interesting. I give credit to a gentleman who was in one of my audiences as a speaker at the very beginning. As a chief marketing officer, I did several presentations on trusting your gut, the importance of developing gut instinct and trusting in it. And it's because as a CMO, I was seeing the drive for data. Too many of members of my team, or I would say younger members of the team, were so fixated on the data that they weren't developing a gut instinct. And at the end of that presentation, I mentioned I was writing a book on mergers and acquisitions and the people side. And a gentleman came up to me afterwards and said, I really love that presentation. Your take on mergers and acquisitions is interesting. It's almost like you're fixated on the humanity of business. And I thought, that's brilliant. And so in my cheeky marketing way, I thought that's what I'm going to be, a chief humanity officer. And it's not to say that I don't respect and understand that business is there to essentially provide profit and to create employment for people. So I get the business piece of it. But at the end of the day, the people, it's become a trite saying, but the people are the most important asset. And sometimes in our fixation on data, we can lose sight of that. So I wanted to, particularly in the space of mergers and acquisitions, highlight that this 70-90% failure rate, I feared would continue if we didn't pause and stop thinking more about the people strategy and the people piece of the business, whether it be culture, organizational structure, just the fact that people go through a very emotional journey, and there needs to be understanding on how you lead people through that. There's a lot of components that I wanted to bring to life that were focused on the humanity of business. So that was essentially the origin story for that title.
I love it. And what I want all of you advisors out there to do is go, and I haven't said this before either. I'm happy to promote people's books, but I want you to go out and buy several copies of Jennifer's book to have in your office for when people are back in seeing you in the office, or you can send it to them. Again, it's called Now What? A Survivor's Guide to Thriving Through Mergers and Acquisitions, and send that to your client. Like, they will love that you are thinking about there's other parts of this. This should be part of your automatic, okay, so-and-so's company is getting bought out. You can even do it if any of you were with broker-dealers. I know the broker-dealer I was with, I think in my tenure there, they went through 3 or 4 mergers and acquisitions. So the people that I worked with at the broker-dealer were kind of constantly in a state of stress. Like, wouldn't it have been lovely if this book was out there then for me to just say, hey, I'm thinking about you. That's the humanity part. They're not your client, but they're someone who's part of your life and you want to support. So go do that. And Jennifer, I know if people want to find out more about you, where should they go? And Doug, I think you'll put this up, right? Yeah.
Thank
So
you. Yeah, it's a tricky last name, so I appreciate you putting it up. Really, two places. My website that's highlighted here. That QR code, if you click on that, it actually gives you chapters from the book, chapters on the stages of grief, as well as the personalities. So you get a bit of a flavor for what the book will deliver. And also LinkedIn. I've really have developed a great following on LinkedIn, and so put a lot of interesting content out there that I know have helped a lot of people. So I would say connect with me in that way as well.
yeah. And if you guys are new to using QR codes on the screen, just open your camera. You might have to expand it, zoom in a little bit, and it'll take you right to the link to get Jennifer's resources. And I'd also say if this is a conversation that's appropriate for some organization you're in, Jennifer is a phenomenal speaker. She's really, really good at what she does. Her mom was one of the first people that taught me training in speaking. And so it's part of her genes to be really, really good. So yeah, and I was lucky enough to have known Jennifer's mom. So thank you for being here with us. This was great information, and I'm really excited about the work that you do in the world, Jennifer. Thank you.
Thank you for having me back, Ellen. I really am so delighted to be here again.
And for all of you watching and listening, again, my name's Ellen Rogin, and there is a special report I have for you. If you go to ellenrogin.com/horse's mouth, you can download the report about what extraordinary advisors know that others don't. And for the last 9 months, I've been doing research on this, and I think you'll find it helpful and informative. And thank you for being here with us. Please connect with me if you have suggestions for guests for us or input or feedback. We're grateful that you're here. And until next time, the question to ponder is, how big of a positive impact are you willing to make? Remember, be great and create great every